Okay, so down on Thursday, actor Jussie Smollett was found guilty on 5 of 6 felony charges. So the question is, should he receive prison time? Now, just in case there's someone out there who isn't aware of who Jussie Smollett is or why he was on trial, I'll just give a brief rundown of the events. So on January the 29th of 2019, Jussie Smollett claimed to have been the victim of a hate crime. He claims that he left his apartment and went to Subway at around 2 a.m. in sub-freezing temperatures when he was attacked by 2 white MAGA hat wearing racists who called him racial and homophobic slurs, beat him, poured bleach on him, and tied a noose around his neck. Of course, we now know, after a police investigation and a trial, though it was pretty obvious from the beginning that this story was nonsense, but we now know that the MAGA hat wearers, the white MAGA hat wearers, were actually 2 Nigerian friends of Jussie's, known in the media as the Osundaro brothers. And Jussie had paid them to orchestrate this attack on him, supposedly so that he could get a raise out of the higher-ups at Empire. But he went to trial, and in the most unsurprising turn of events ever, was found guilty. So again, Daniel, the question is, should he receive a prison sentence for this?
I have mixed feelings on that.
Mine are less mixed, I would say.
Well, okay. It's really, I hate to say a victimless crime. It's a non-violent crime, right?
Of course, yes.
I mean, there was a financial issue because the police had to investigate this and waste time on it. Had to go to court.
Yeah, about $130,000, I believe, is what the police said at last check.
On one hand, I would think heavy fines would be good for this. But on the other hand, it's dangerous in the world we live in today, I feel like, to fake a hate crime. I mean, you're just trying to get us more divided than we already are.
I mean, it was an extraordinarily divisive hoax. There's no question about that.
Even though, I mean, it seemed hard to believe, right, at first, that someone
Wait, the
would
story?
actually... Yeah.
I mean, the story was almost impossible to believe from the very beginning. I mean, it was ludicrous.
So with that, like, maybe it's not that divisive because it was too far-fetched, but still, you just can't do that these days. You can't fake a hate crime. Not nowadays.
No, I mean, of course I agree. I mean, it's extraordinarily divisive. But I'm a little torn. Now, generally speaking, for nonviolent offenses, I do not support prison sentences. I think we have far too many people in prison, but I am a little torn with this just because of the persistence of his lies. He has been caught in 4K. I mean, they even have video of him, apparently, that came out in trial, doing a dry run of the event. And yet he still insists that he was the victim of a racist hate crime. So part of me thinks that maybe he does deserve some small prison sentence. I mean, if it were the case that he had realized he was caught, accepted it, apologized, I might have a different opinion, right? In fact, I almost certainly would if he showed just even the smallest amount of remorse. But clearly he's not capable of that.
Perhaps not, though that sort of begs the question. I mean, where is the line between self-absorbed asshole and having narcissistic personality disorder?
Well, I think that's probably something a psychologist would have to diagnose. Though I'm very comfortable diagnosing self-absorbed asshole, just so we're clear.
Right. I just feel like when there's proof like that and you keep doubling down, it almost seems like mental illness to me, right? I'm not trying to diagnose him myself, but
right.
It just makes me wonder, right? Like maybe the man needs some help more than he needs to be put in prison.
Well, my assumption is that if at some point in the trial his defense had decided that he was going to admit to it, they probably would have had him checked out by a psychologist who would then tell the court, that his mental illness helped to cause this incident, it exacerbated it in some way. But since he was never going to plead guilty or even admit to it after he was found guilty, I don't see that happening. I don't see him going anywhere near a psychologist.
I still don't understand how he thought he was going to get away with it.
I mean, it's a good question.
I mean, in Chicago, there are probably cameras on every street corner.
Well, I mean, he was caught on several different cameras. Both he and the brothers were. But my guess is he assumed that given the political climate, and honestly, he wasn't entirely incorrect here, that the media would just immediately jump to his defense. And in fact, many of them did. Even though, again, the story was absurd from the very beginning. Now, when you look at sentencing guidelines, apparently, worst case scenario, he could receive up to, I think it's like 14 or 15 years in prison, but I mean, that's not going to happen, right? That is assuming, the upper end of sentencing on every charge, right? Which for someone without a criminal history, that's just not going to happen. However, apparently the judge can take into account the fact that Jussie perjured himself on the stand when he gave testimony as an enhancement for his sentence. So he may end up getting, somewhere between 1 and 2 years. But of course, the question is whether he should, right?
Right. Now, just to be clear on that, like, he's not being found guilty of perjury, right? Just the judge is just assuming that he perjured himself, so he's tacking on a bit of time.
Well, the judge is allowed to assume perjury because the jurors are the finders of fact, right? They found that he lied.
So I don't think I agree with that. I think you should at least have to stand trial for perjury to get any kind of punishment for that.
Well, but the punishment would not in this circumstance wouldn't be technically for perjury, right? Perjury would be an enhancement for the 6 charges. Well, because he's only found guilty of 5. For the 5 charges he was found guilty of. Now, admittedly, it's a loose distinction, but there is a distinction.
I just don't agree with that. I'm sure it's not a huge deal. Maybe it's probably not that much time to be added on. But I don't think they should be able to decide that. I don't think a judge should be able to assume perjury. Maybe if you wanted to hold him in contempt of court for perjuring himself and fine him for it, that's one thing, right? But you shouldn't be able to give someone extra jail time for something they didn't, I knew he stood trial, but he wasn't tried for perjury.
Well, he wasn't tried for perjury, but he was tried on the facts under which he committed perjury. I mean, the jury did decide whether or not he told the truth. He wasn't on trial for perjury, but they were the finders of fact, and they did determine that the story he told was false. And you can't just get on the stand and lie.
No, but I mean, how many people have gotten on the stand and lied in their own defense? And
well, a good attorney just rarely ever lets that happen, actually.
I understand, but a lot of people have lied in their own defense, and
and if you're caught, you get punished for it.
Yeah,
I don't know if perjury is an enhancement in other states. I know that it is in Illinois because I was reading about it earlier. So I don't even know how common this is, or whether the judge will even use it. Right? I mean, this is completely his option. This is just something he can consider during sentencing.
That's fine, but I don't think he should add anything on for it. I honestly don't think he should. Maybe he should get a little bit of time to sort of teach him a lesson and get some heavy fines, but I don't feel like he should serve any real jail time for this.
So generally, I would agree that filing false police reports isn't the sort of thing that you should go to prison for. But given the circumstances of this one, the lengths he has gone to, in the face of overwhelming evidence of his guilt, he has refused to admit to it. And part of me thinks that, just for persisting in this delusion, that he probably should get some prison time. Not much. I'm thinking maybe a year and then probation with a hefty fine. Again, under normal circumstances, I would never suggest prison for a nonviolent offense like this. But what he did was so divisive. I mean, in
inflammatory as well.
Yeah, I mean, right. in a political climate as polarized as the one we're in, what he did was like lighting a match near gasoline.
That's true, especially in Chicago. I mean, you could have ended up with riots in Chicago just over
Easily.
this.
Easily. I mean, honestly, I think the only thing that saved us from riots was just how preposterous his story was from day one. If it had been even remotely plausible, there almost certainly would have been riots.
So yeah, you have a point, and you may be right. Maybe I think if there had been riots, then definitely he should serve time for it because it would cause much more damage to the community, right? Though as it is, it seems like most of the damage at this point was just wasted time of the police. And I mean, he destroyed his own career with it too. I don't think he'll ever work as an actor again.
But not all damage to a community can be summed up in property damage, right?
Well, that's not what I meant. I don't feel like the community in Chicago or even, our nation was hurt more by this crime just because we found out about it early on.
Maybe so. There's just something about what he did infuriates me.
Oh, no,
and then to persist in it. I mean, they had the check that he used to pay the brothers to commit this crime. And he still has the audacity to claim that he's innocent. And not only does he claim that he's innocent, but just that self-righteous martyr complex he has. Oh, he's the gay Tupac. Oh, it's just disgusting. I'm not going to shed a tear if he does see prison time.
Right. Well, okay, here, let me just say one reason I'm a little torn on this, okay?
Okay.
I feel like the greatest victims of this particular crime are people in the future who face a situation like this, but they have really faced a hate crime, but they have little proof. They may be afraid to come forward if he is punished heavily for this. Does that make sense?
Granted, I understand that.
Granted, there's evidence against him. There's a good deal of evidence against him, but this could harm people in the future. So it's sort of a double-edged sword there. For one, he needs to be punished for causing problems for these people in the future. But the more heavily you punish him for this, it may frighten people off in the future of reporting said crimes. Does that make sense?
I understand what you're saying, but I think there's an important distinction here. And that is the difference between not having a lot of evidence that the crime you're alleging took place and a mountain of evidence that it didn't. Right? That's the big distinction here. Jussie isn't just making a claim that there's not a lot of evidence to support. He's making a claim that all evidence available says never happened. So I don't think this is going to negatively impact necessarily the scenario you're discussing where someone had a legitimate crime committed against them, but just don't have a lot of evidence.
Perhaps not, but I think it will still impact, trustfulness of those people in the future.
Maybe. I'm just not sure what impact that should have, if any, on Jussie's sentencing.
Well, no, and as I said, like in my mind, on one hand, he should be punished more heavily for that. And on the other hand, he should maybe get off a little lighter because of it. Right. So I don't know. I'm honestly starting to lean toward right now, make a bit of an example out of him because of the fact there was so much evidence against him.
And how dangerous and irresponsible what he did was.
It was very irresponsible. But again, it's just a nonviolent crime, right? It's hard to imagine throwing someone in jail for any amount of time over a nonviolent crime.
And when you state it like that, just nonviolent crime, right? My immediate instinct is to agree completely. I don't want to see anyone in prison for nonviolent offenses. We have far too many people in prison, and I think that should, federal prison is an ugly place, right? And that should be reserved for people who have committed horrific acts. But again, just stop lying, man. I mean, if he'd have come out at any point and said, yeah, you caught me, I made it up, here's my reason for it. I don't even care how good it was, right? As long as he admitted that he lied. But as long as he's going to persist in this delusion, I'm fine with at least some prison time. No more than maybe a year and a half, 2 years, but some.
I can definitely see him getting some prison time. And, I've got to be honest, he had to have had, I can't say terrible counsel, but he must not have listened to them at all. Any lawyer would have suggested that he admit to what he did with so much evidence.
I would have thought that as well, right? Immediately seek a plea deal. And my guess is that if he got an attorney that wasn't an activist, that was probably the first thing they told him, right? Let's get you a good plea deal. But clearly he's a narcissist. I don't think it ever crossed his mind to admit to this.
Well, you may be right there. And it also goes to prove that perhaps activists are not going to give you the best legal counsel.
Yeah, that tends to be the case, right? They have an agenda. But in this case, I think you're right. I think a good attorney would have said, okay, let's plea.
Yeah.
You'll get a slap on the wrist, you'll pay a fine, but hey, you'll have your life ahead of you, right?
Right. Well,
and I'll be honest, at this point, now that he's been found guilty and he's still insisting that he was the victim of a hate crime, I'm not sure that it will change my opinion if he goes and throws himself on the mercy of the court at this point. Because at this point, it'll clearly just be because he realizes that he might actually do prison time.
He needs to do something because he very well could face prison time.
I still think that prison time is probably unlikely considering he's a first-time offender. But considering he did perjure himself on the stand and is showing absolutely no remorse, these are not things that are going to play well in front of a judge at sentencing.
Well, I'd say at the very least, they should throw the book at him with fines, as heavily as they can on that.
But as long as they're fines that actually hurt him, right?
Well, exactly. That's why I said you have to throw the book at him because he's got enough money that, $100,000 fine is not going to do anything to him.
Right. That'd be my guess. Like, I don't know exactly how much money he has. I know he's not a super successful actor, but my understanding is he made quite a bit on Empire.
Let's not forget that Mighty Duck money he
got
when he was a
Ducks
kid.
Appearance, yeah.
Yeah.
So something tells me that the Mighty Ducks paycheck isn't exactly paying the bills these days, but
maybe not. But he's probably ruined his chance of some kind of reboot where he comes back as an adult, right?
I think that's fair. Hey, if you enjoyed this brief segment from the Fact and Suspicion podcast, please check out the rest of our episodes either here on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Also, it would really help us out if you would leave a comment or a like, but most importantly, share us with your friends.